Welcome everyone to another episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I have to tell you, I am absolutely beside myself as my guest today is not only just a rockin' powerhouse, she is also someone who is just become a dear friend, and I'm truly blessed to have her in my life. So I am super excited to say hello and welcome the amazing Laura Jack to the show. Welcome, Laura. So glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm blushing. You can't tell.
Oh, yeah. Well, they can for those that are watching. They can actually see you.
I know, but I don't know if I actually
No,
blush.
you don't. You're not like me. I turn like 15 shades of red when I blush. But yeah. So, as you can see, we're going to have a lot of fun today. And we never know where the conversation is going to go. This is our opportunity to have the really deep, connected, courageous conversations. And it's also our opportunity to talk about what it really means to be a leader today, knowing that leadership is a choice. And it's all about how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility in that space. And so without further ado, let me share with you this amazing powerhouse who is joining me in the ring today. We're going to go several rounds, I assure you. And let me tell you more about the amazing Laura Jack. She is the author of the #1 bestseller, The Compassion Code, a phenomenal book, let me tell you. And it's about how to say the right things when the wrong thing happens. It teaches compassionate communication and how we can relate to one another more effectively during the challenging moments in life. Her mission is to cultivate a culture of compassion, starting with herself, and to create a better understanding of loss and its accompanying grief. And I love that she does this work so beautifully and powerfully for not only what she does for herself, but what she does for other people. And it really is truly stepping into that deep space of compassion, really stepping into deeper level conversations, and particularly in those moments when we experience grief, which, Laura, I would love to jump right in and talk about. What does that really mean? What does grief look like for people? I think we usually keep it in one box, and we don't realize that grief is really this bigger, broader category of life that happens to us.
Exactly. I think that's really it, Candy. I think the thing to remember is that grief goes way beyond death. Death is something that we know is a grieving experience, and it doesn't always have to be. It kind of depends, right? So sometimes we're like, oh, I don't feel like I'm grieving this person, and that's okay too. So it's actually the definition that we use is from the Grief Recovery Institute, and it is this, and I will say it twice because it's like to wrap your mind around it, I need to say it slowly and 2 times. So it's the conflicting feelings that come at the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. The conflicting feelings, not the sad, bad, terrible feelings. It's the conflicting feelings. So it's not just when we feel devastated, it's also when we feel relieved. It's when we feel this, when you say, part of me wants to go to the store and part of me wants to go home, right? That's where the conflict inside of us, part of me feels relieved that this person, is no longer my spouse. And part of me feels devastated because it's the loss of my hopes, dreams, and expectations about how I thought my life was going to turn out. Right. And so it's never one or the other. It's always both. And sometimes, there's degrees of all things, right, in life, but it's really recognizing that grief is an experience that we have as humans that doesn't make us bad or wrong. In fact, it is what makes us human. And when we have that recognition of the truth about grief, that we have these conflicting feelings in all these aspects of our lives, which I can get into in a minute, but it gives us permission to have compassion for ourselves and other people, right? Because otherwise we're like, what's wrong with me? I hear that so often. What's wrong with me? Why am I still sad? Why am I still grieving? Why am I still angry? And the reason you're still anything, like still in quotes, is because you haven't acknowledged it in the first place. Right. So the things that want our attention, they're going to keep on, trying to get our attention in ways that we often don't like if we don't pay attention.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful. And I have to say, I already have chills, and I usually do when you and I have conversations about anything, because it is such powerful work that you're talking about. And what I like, and I want to reiterate it again, because as I heard you say this, it's really the conflicting feelings that come during the opportunity when change happens. And so what's so unbelievably powerful and even lifting in that space is that's our life every moment. And I mean, if you really think about the fact that I heard once that said we're either going into a conflict, in the middle of conflict, or coming out of conflict, you realize that's the only way we move forward. There are lots of opportunities where grief shows up in various spaces, because we do have these sometimes diabolical, sometimes very conflicting, sometimes more than just two conflicting emotions and feelings that show up, where we're like, I feel like a horrible person because part of me is relieved, and I'm relieved, and I feel like I'm not engaged enough, and we end up in this whole space where we start to do the downpouring of shoulding, that we start going, I should be this. And what I really love most about what you said is understanding that definition of what grief really is, understanding that it is simply, and I say that and not to dismiss it, but to say it in terms of the general context of what we're talking about. It's simply conflicting feelings that show up when change occurs. In that space, you have the ability then to give yourself permission to have compassion. And what even replaying that back just gives me chills, right? I got goosebumps everywhere, because that's the piece I feel that's missing so deeply, and why we have such conflicted conversations even, is we don't start with compassion for ourselves.
Yeah.
And you can't extend compassion and kindness and grace for others when you're not standing in that space. And so, Laura, I'd love to hear more about not only your perspective in that space, and what does it really mean to have compassion? I mean, you wrote the compassion code, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Because I do think sometimes that's another word that gets thrown around, like authenticity, have more compassion, blah, blah, right? And
right.
What does that really mean, especially when it starts with self? What does that space of compassion look like?
So self-compassion is relating kindly to ourselves, like you would a good friend. Like when you're being a good friend, when you feel like you're like, I was a good friend today. Like,
pat me on the back.
Good job. Like, because sometimes you're like, I was a bad friend, right? So when we were being a good friend, the moment where we're a good friend to someone else, that is how we need to treat ourselves. Right? That is self-compassion, relating kindly to ourselves, even under challenging circumstances. Right? And so you actually really helped me not long ago, Candy, because I was shutting all over myself. I wasn't showing myself a lot of self-compassion. I was not walking my talk because I had a newborn recently. I'm a 5-month-old now. And I was like, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not doing and you were like, that voice is not a compassionate voice, that you're not, and I was not walking my talk. And I was so grateful that you lovingly and kindly pointed that out to me. You were being a good friend, because I realized, I am not being kind to myself. How am I going to be Miss Compassion Code, as my husband calls me, if I'm not, usually condescendingly, okay, Miss Compassion Code. How am I being that if I'm not being kind to myself first? And so the other piece of compassion, like what is compassion besides relating kindly to ourselves first, is recognizing that everybody has a story behind that facade, right? So we don't always see the story. We often don't hear the story. Right. We often have to just be in the dark about what somebody's story is. And in my book, I write something like, if we were in this alternative universe where like you had your story plastered across your head, like my mom died today, or like I'm going through a divorce settlement, or like I had to put my dog down, or whatever, like across your forehead is like what you're going through, people would be like, oh, I'm sorry. Like they wouldn't treat you the way we kind of tend to treat each other, which is like not very patient and not very kind. Like, because if we recognize that everybody has a story and why they're acting the way they are is probably because of that story, then we can have a lot more compassion for them. Yeah. And how that relates back to self is when we recognize that we're going through something, we have a story. Like life isn't always easy, and that's okay. And it's just being kind to ourselves through it, right? Till we get to the other side, and always be kind to yourself, right? Whenever you can. And so that's kind of where those two kind of line up. And I think that, you asked a good question, which is like compassion is a word that's getting thrown around a lot. And it's funny because when I started this book, it was not a buzzword because I started it 4 years ago. And so it's become a buzzword, which I'm thrilled about actually. But what I want to talk about for a second, if you're okay with it, is like, what's the difference between compassion, sympathy, and empathy? Because I
Yes,
think those
please.
get really confused. And then I'll give you a couple solutions of like what to do if you are leaning one way or the other. So I have this thing called the compassion bell curve, and it is in the book. So, but I'll just imagine a bell curve. Okay. At the top of the bell curve is compassion. So right in the middle is the compassion. On the right-hand side of compassion is empathy. So empathy is feeling with someone. So empaths, you typically know who you are because you often call yourself like, I'm an empath. I feel people's feelings, like you get it, right? You feel with them. Sometimes to the point where you like cry with someone, or you feel like this intense pain when, they feel intense pain. They're telling you something and you find yourself feeling exhausted, devastated, whatever the feelings that they're having are. You can't go into a crowded room because you just take on other people's energy, right? So if you're an empath, you probably know who you are, right? So that's on one side of compassion. They're not the same thing. So what we are, when we are on that side of compassion, when we're on the empathy side, you feel with, what happens if we continue down that road is it can lead to burnout. So if you take it that step farther, you're running into burnout because you're exhausted. You're feeling with someone else or people too often, right? Meaning that it's hurting you. And then on the other side of burnout is disconnect. At some point, people who are burnt out for a long time end up disconnecting. And they're like, I just can't do it anymore. You see it in all sorts of professions, right? Where people are feeling with, and they're just like on the road to burnout. Now, on the other side, and then I'll tell you what to do with it. On the other side of compassion is sympathy. Sympathy is feeling for someone. Like, oh, that's so sad for them, right? It's more distanced, which can be helpful in some ways, but also can lead to pity. So on the other side of sympathy is pity. And that's when you're like, oh, that poor person, tap, 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 like sympathy, but on like kind of a even more disconnected way. And then on the other side of pity is disconnect. You've removed yourself so much that you don't even feel for those people anymore, right? And so when you're on the sympathy side of things, we have to lean into connection to reach compassion. It's like we need to connect. And when we're on the empathy side of compassion, we have to create good boundaries to find our way to compassion. And if you look at the bottom of my little bell curve, it says, all roads lead to disconnect if you don't start with compassion for self.
Yeah. And I would say, as somebody who has experienced that, especially because I am a deep empath and I've had a lot of work over the years to create appropriate boundaries and to not let myself, and also create the right energy shields and gates so that I am not walking into a room as an extrovert who draws energy anyway. I'm not drawing everybody's energy instantaneously that can knock me out. And there are times, and I even feel it now, where I get the warning signs because I can sense the disconnect or the I'm so over it kind of emotion that starts to show up. I'm tired of being all for everyone. When I realize that that's on me because I have it, and that's the space that you're talking about, that space to, I like how you say, lean into compassion, to say for myself, Candy, you're not taking care of yourself. You do need to unplug temporarily so that you can go be kind and recharge and refuel and love you so that your cup is full and overflowing. And I think there's so much power in that.
Yes.
Around understanding where you're detaching and how, because I do think the fact that you say that all roads can lead to disconnection, if not having the right balance and harmony in that space. The point is where is the disconnect coming from? Because I think so many times we use that as a catch-all. Oh, I'm just disconnected. However, is it from a place of I've been over sympathizing and I haven't had any kind of connection and way to engage with someone so that there's that human element? Or am I so far disconnected because I'm taking on so much and feeling it all for them that I can't distinguish between my own sense of space and feeling and what is theirs? Because for you empaths out there, I know you get that when you take on too much and haven't created that space, you can't distinguish between, you're like, I thought I was feeling really good. My life is good. And why do I feel like I want to curl in the ball and cry? Because it's not your energy you want to cry about. And you've gotten so blended in terms of where it's all coming from, because you don't have that space of compassion to really create a place to fuel that. And there's something I wanted to come back to, and you kind of alluded to it, and I'm curious, because as you were talking before you got into the bell curve, and I really would love to hear some of the strategies inside of that space, but even to take a step back for just a moment, you talked about, having compassion for others and being able to lean in that space and being able to realize that everyone has a story that we know nothing about. Even the people that tell us their story probably aren't telling us the full.
Right.
The question, and you alluded to this, but I'd love to ask the question more directly, is sometimes is there the space where we don't even know the story for ourselves, where we don't even know what is happening for us? I mean, it's easy to say the moments, easy in terms of being able to say it. Yes, my parent died, or yes, I'm getting divorced, or is there also the space of sometimes we don't even understand or know the actual story we're going through?
Oh, yeah.
So to even understand that, no wonder why sometimes we don't get the story other people have as well.
Exactly. We aren't giving ourselves any compassion. There's a chapter in the book that says everybody has a story and you're someone.
Oh, I love that. See, that's the question, right?
And then the whole section of questions, like asking you about you.
Yeah.
Like, and for somebody to actually go through and do them, I've had people who write me and they're like, oh my God, this was like incredibly powerful and like kind of earth shattering in some ways. And in that same breath, there's a lot of compassion that can be born there, because it's like, oh man, I can't believe I made it this far. Right. Like, I'm amazing. Like, I can't believe I went through all that and I survived. And I'm actually doing okay. Right. So actually, yes, like 100% yes. Yeah. A lot of times people aren't recognizing their own story because they've ignored it, because they are trying to just get by. Right. That whole ignore phenomena that we think is like so helpful. It's not. No, it's not a helpful tool. And it helps us until it doesn't help us. Right.
Well, absolutely.
It doesn't, but it prohibits us from really having self-compassion, because I'm fine or I'm pushing it under the rug means that we're not fully acknowledging our own experience, right? Because we're afraid of feeling our feelings. And, I had this really funny experience the other day at the gym. I'm taking bar classes. For those of you who have taken bar, it's like tiny movements, but it's intense. It's like super, super intense. And so you do like 100 tiny movements, like the same, like little, whatever, like 100 times. And by the end of it, your arm is like, feels like it's going to fall off. Right. And you're like, I don't know if I can keep going because I might die. Like, there's like certain feelings like that with even working out. And I related it to the experience of uncovering your story. Because sometimes it hurts so much, you think you might die. Mm-hmm. Like, if I keep going, if I keep like leaning in and figuring out what my life experience has been, I might die because it's so painful.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, no, you won't. Like, if I kept doing that same movement over and over again, I might get a cramp.
Yeah.
I might like have to sit down and take a break. I might
be sore, right? You got to recover from that.
Right? And I might have to like then take even better care of myself.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to die from uncovering my story.
Well, and it's interesting because the way that you talk about uncovering your story, it's actually one of the tools that I help people when it's connecting into their why. A lot of times I talk about, their living legacy, the space that they want to create this amazing what and their why. I often say it's the story that you're afraid to step into. Your why is part of that whole life experience, that journey, that space you're on. And I remember watching something, I think it was a Super Soul Sunday with Maya Angelou and Oprah. And Maya was talking about how, because she was talking specifically around healing from abuse, and said it's not the incident itself that causes the grief and the anxiety and all of this. It's the perpetual telling of the story that we do, that every time we tell it, we embellish it, we make it bigger, instead of really getting into the story and addressing what the story started from and what the incident, what the trigger was inside of that. And I think for a lot of people, there's so much opportunity because either A, it's what you're saying where they want to push it away. And I truly think that some of the worst 4-letter words in the English language are fine, good, and the 2-1, okay.
Nice.
Anyone, right, nice. Because anyone that knows me, that works with me one-on-one in particular, knows that if I send a text saying, hey, how's the week going? Good. My next thing is, okay, what's really going on? Because first of all, good is not a feeling, or I'll say, how are you feeling? Fine. Okay, try again. Fine is a state for China. You can have fine China. It's a fine condition. It's fine print. It is not a feeling. So
Right.
if,
Exactly.
you know, and so it's that space of really helping people identify what you're talking about, that emotion or that feeling, because I think we fall into one of two categories more times
Right.
than
I
not.
hear
Either
what
push
you're,
it away,
or we
or I'm going to
obsess and
keep
like,
telling the story so that I look like the victim, the martyr, or the hero inside of it. And I'm just going to keep making it bigger because there's a safety in me continually perpetuating in that space. And so do you see that when you're working with people and when you see
oh
things
yeah.
show up?
And you hit something really interesting, which is some people ignore, and don't own their story at all. And then other people become a victim of their story. And I always tell people, like, grief recovery or grief support groups can be dangerous, because for people who are in the victim role or like find themselves in the victim role, often you tell your story, you cry, you get support, and then you do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And it can also become a numbing behavior because you feel better for the moment and then you need to do it again. Right? So actually storytelling, knowing your story and overtelling your story over and over and again are two different things, right? So it's owning the story, but then not becoming a victim to the story. Right. So owning is
because there's an addictive piece to that, right? There's an addiction. It's another form of a self-sabotaging, victim addictive habit that we
or approval seeking,
because it's a coping thing, right?
Coping or approval seeking. Yeah. Like every time I used to tell people what happened, like why I got in this job, like in the grief world in the first place, was because my mom was killed. She was run over by a car. And in the beginning, I remember like I hated the response that people gave me, which was, oh, like poor you. And like, it is poor me. Like it was really devastating, but I didn't like the response because I hadn't given myself any of that yet. I hadn't even acknowledged the devastation I was experiencing. And when I saw the look on their faces reflecting that at me, it wasn't aligned because I hadn't allowed myself to go there yet. So it was like, it was really hard because I was like, these two things aren't matching up. I'm saying I'm okay, I'm going to be okay. And you're telling me that it's not okay by your reaction. And I had to actually come to terms with my story, which was, yeah, this sucks. It's like the worst thing that ever happened to me. And it became one of the most amazing lessons of my life, and how I've ended up helping the world is through my mom's death. And so really, like, your pain can turn into your purpose, right? In the meantime, though, sometimes the pain is just so painful and you don't really want that reflection, right? So I think that owning the story and not having the story define who you are.
Yeah. And there's so much I love about that. And I love who you are. And I love that, you know, when we have those opportunities to take that pain and create a purpose from it. And, you know, it's no different than even anything that you're told from how we engage in things from a sales and marketing. It's either pain or pleasure, right? And I mean, it's the same thing about the journey that we've been on. It's been the most memorable things, or it's been the things that have caused us this source of pain. But what I love about that is you doing the work to go through the process to realize that ultimately it's a choice. It's a choice in how you want to continue to have, because as much as we can unattach from some of the emotional triggers inside of that story, it's always a part of who we are, but there's a choice in what we want to do with that, right? And I think you so beautifully and powerfully demonstrate that while that was the worst moment in your life, it's also offered you this incredible opportunity and gift in terms of how you get to show up and serve others, and what you get to choose to do about what that story has meant for you. And I just, what a powerful way to show up for other people. And I know you do that so lovingly and open. And so as you do that, and that gets to be sort of the frame that you can work from, what are some of the strategies that you share with people around going through that process, being able to deal with the grief on their terms and not what they think they have to do through that space?
Well, I think that is probably the number one thing, is letting go of what you're supposed to do or what other people tell you. Because you have to, and I always say, listen in instead of out. It's like, listen inward, instead of outward, because other people are going to have opinions for you. And only you know. I don't know if you like dreams. I love dreams. And my stepmom and I always talk about dreams. And she says, if somebody helps you with dream interpretation, you're the only person who can know when somebody else says, like, gives you suggestion about what the dream might be about. You're the only person who actually deep inside knows whether that is true for you. Right. Like, does that sound right? No. Yeah. With dream interpretation, people are like, no, I don't think that's what the dream was about. But when somebody tells you how you're supposed to grieve, you're like, oh, okay, because you've never been through it. And so you think, oh, somebody else must be able to tell me, right? And so I think it's about realizing that you have to listen in, and it's okay to seek help. But sometimes people give you their opinion without being asked, right? And those are the opinions that you can let go of, because oftentimes they're not of service or in service of your best self, right? And so going through the process for me, it was about a choice. It was about, I wallowed. I have a little expression that I say that is, when you fall off a horse, lay on the ground as long as you need to. And because that perspective is really helpful. And when you're ready to get up, grab somebody's hand and let them help you. Right. But like, sometimes you just got to lay on the ground and just like, it's like, yeah.
Even if we gave ourselves more time to do that and actually looked up and just looked in and looked up. Right. And just let ourselves just be still for a moment. Such power in that.
I know. I want to mention something, because this is a big myth about grief. And again, if you haven't read the Grief Recovery Handbook, I know that my book's amazing also, the Compassion Kit.
It is.
Yes. And the Grief Recovery Handbook is such a helpful tool. So anybody who's grieving, who's like ready to take action to heal, that is a really good first step. Okay. Just read the first 58 pages of the Grief Recovery Handbook, and Candy can put that in the notes if she wants.
Absolutely.
But it's, to me, like, it was one of the lifesavers for me. And one of the myths that you will discover in that book is that time does not heal all wounds.
Please say that again.
Time does not heal all wounds. Like, think about back in like high school or college when you're sitting in a class.
I actually really dislike that expression.
The clock is ticking by, right? Like, nothing happens in the time unless you're taking action. So it's all about taking action within the time. And that comes back to the idea of choice. Right. I don't get to choose what happened to me. My life, my mom dying, that happened. All the other things that have happened to me, they happened. The choices that I have are, how am I going to proceed with my life moving forward? Period. Like, that's what happens in time. Grief, you don't feel better in time if you just sit around and wait for it to feel better. You have to take action to heal. Healing doesn't just like magically occur. You have to do things for yourself. You have to take care of yourself. You have to seek help. You have to seek professional help or friend help, or, do yoga or anything. I mean, I have 100,000 solutions for you, but ultimately you have to reach inside and decide, what do I want to do that is going to help me feel better? And start with those little, I always say, baby steps. And so that, to me, the journey is saying, okay, I call it the F it point. It's when you've hit the point where you're like, F it. Yep. I can't live like this anymore. Actually, and just like a small aside, it happens in all arenas, not just like with grief. So this past 5.5 months, my son is 5.5 months old. And I got to the point about a week ago where I said, F it. I cannot keep getting up every hour and a half in the night. I need to do sleep training. So I hired a coach. My friend Natalie, she's called the Baby Sleep Trainer. She's amazing. And I hired her, and in 3 days, Kai is now sleeping through the night with 1 feeding, and he's taking naps 3 times a day, like solid naps. And he's doing it on his own, unassisted, because I hit my F it point and said, no more. I can't do this, or I won't survive. One of us won't live to see the tail. Through.
Well, and I think people lose sight of, and I first of all, I love that you're so blunt and put it out there, because honestly, we don't say that. Most people don't say F it enough. They don't say, I'm done. That is a 4-letter word that I absolutely embrace. I am done. When I say done, D-O-N-E, put a fork in it. It is over. It is not happening anymore. F it, move on. And what people don't realize is, too many times they're worried about what everybody else thinks, how they're going to get judged, the criticism, the this, the shoulding, the whatever. And at some point you finally have to say, F it, I'm doing what I need to do for me, whether you like it or not. As long as I am not going out and intentionally harming another human being
or myself,
or being a jackass, right, on purpose, then there is nothing that says that I don't get to put out my full statement to say, F it, I'm done. And there is such incredible, I cannot stress this for people enough. Stop waiting for someone else to do it for you. Stop waiting for someone to tell you which action to take. Stop waiting. And it's that space of the
self-authorization.
Right. And you talk about grief is not going to just show up and be magically healed unless you get off your butt and take action in some capacity. And I don't care what action it is, always taking action is the answer. Because even if it's the wrong action, you can change it.
It informs the next behavior.
Right. And the no action, the space that makes me absolutely crazy is when people say, well, I'm not going to do anything. Because the minute you say no action is the minute you allow everyone else to decide for you. And you have to get to a place in your life where you say, F it, I'm done, and I'm going to take the reins back. Yeah, the horse just threw me off. Yes, you just helped me up. And now I'm going to take the reins and get back in the saddle, and I'm going to decide which direction to steer.
Right. Exactly. And we like to say
where you show it, right?
We like to say F it instead of F all of it, right? So like do your little F-its so that you don't have to have a big F it all and where you move to like an island and open a bar and abandon your family and stuff, right? So like do the small F-its along the way.
Do your little F-its. I like it.
Right? So that you don't have to get to the point where you're like, F it all. Like, screw life.
Well, that's just it, because that's the disconnection point you were talking about.
Right.
Because that's what happens when you get to F it all. You shut everybody out, and then you go in and you hibernate for 3 months, and you're sitting on the couch eating, bags of Cheetos and watching Netflix marathons, and you haven't gone out and you haven't showered in 5 days. Trust me, I say this as someone who's had those F it all, but I love do the little F-its. Honor and do the little F-its.
And little F-its are like little actions. It doesn't mean that you are like, the F it all can go one of two ways, right? It can go like, F it all, I'm moving to an island in the middle of, the Pacific. And I'm abandoning all like my work and my family and everything, which is still action. Or it can be like, F it all, like I'm going to sit on the couch and be alone for the rest of time and like really wallow in my own self, right? Which, like I said, wallowing is okay. Like it serves a purpose for gaining perspective as long as at some point you ask for help. Because like I said, if you're going to be laying on the ground, like make sure you take advantage of the perspective from the ground.
Yeah.
Right?
That's powerful. And I will say, if you're going to F it all and get the island, at least have the opportunity to get like Necker Island, like Richard Branson, so you can invite people to it when you decide that you're ready to bring people in. Because I mean, there is something appealing about going F it. I just want my island in the Caribbean and be like, I could live off the mangoes and the coconuts.
Hell yeah.
And have a private jet that takes
from somebody who like lived on an island in the Caribbean for 5 years. I can tell you that it sounds really romantic until the chitra bites you. And then there are things about this like life that are beautiful and amazing. Yes. And like, you can dream about, Necker
Euphoria.
Island.
Well, and the thing is, euphoria doesn't exist, right? Because I mean, Austin, I tell people, I love everything about Austin except 3 things: traffic, fire ants. No, the heat doesn't bother me at all because it's actually not a humid heat at all. It actually is quite fantastic. So the couple days that, as my sister says, it gets, just stupid hot, absolutely doesn't bother me. It is the traffic during rush hour. Mm-hmm. It is fire ants, which I still have found absolutely zero understanding for what that is. And I had a third one, and now I can't even remember what the third one was. But there's only 3 things. But even in what I would call a fantastic, amazing city, we still have things that, because, the fact that I've already been bit by fire ants again this year, I'm like, what is it with me and, and learning to grieve through my conflicting thing of, I know I'm supposed to love all of God's creatures, and I really seriously just want to burn them all because I don't understand what point they serve, working through my own
And
stuff.
It's okay to feel that way. Like, I want to give a tip about how to respond when somebody tells you that they're having these conflicting feelings. It's okay. It's okay to feel all of your feelings.
Yes.
It's okay. Your feelings are valid.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what you've been through.
Yeah.
That's what you
See,
say.
but that is a powerful phrase in itself. When someone says, how you feeling? And you say, okay, not acceptable. When you say to yourself, it's okay,
okay.
Then that absolutely is something.
Because you're validating them. That's basically all you're doing is you're saying, it's like when somebody said, like I get a lot of people who cry. That just happens to me because I like to listen. So people like to cry to me. When they cry, I don't say, it's okay. I say, it's okay to be sad.
Mm-hmm. Or it's okay to be feeling whatever you're feeling.
Right.
Because sometimes those tears aren't coming from sadness, right?
I guess, so my thought, the person who this happens with the most in my life is my 3.5-year-old, right? And I say, are you frustrated? Are you sad? Are you angry? Are you confused? She's like, I'm frustrated. Or like if she sometimes actually gets hurt and she'll be like, I'm sad. And then she's like, and I say, it's okay to be sad. And then one day I was having a hard time and I said, Mommy's just having a hard time today. And she's like, it's okay to be sad. And I was like, winning.
Right? Because they model what we do, right? I mean, they so model.
Which goes to your leadership thing. It's like, how do you be a leader? By leading by example.
Absolutely. And I love you so powerfully do that. And even in the space of you sharing your vulnerability, because you demonstrate how human you are, that I was in a place where I got to help you, where you help so many people all the time. And so I love that vulnerability, knowing that we're always in a space to be learning. We're always in a space to sometimes get in our own muck and have to get to a place where we go, okay, I need a little effort right now. I need to clear something out. And so I honor that so much about you. And I know as people are listening, I mean, this is a real conversation. This is real life, right? And there's people that may want to really lean in more into the work that you're doing, lean into that connection. And what is the best way they can lean in and really learn how to, and I love how you say that, listen in versus out instead of out. What's the best way for them to find out more about you, the work you're doing, and how they can connect with you?
So the best way to like secretly know all about my life is to read my book, because I give away way a lot. Like it was
so beautiful
funny.
Book. It really is. The Compassion Code.
The Compassion Code, how to say the right thing when the wrong thing happens. So my neighbor, I was living in like where I live in Hood River, Oregon is like a tiny town, and there's not a lot of rentals in the summer because everybody wants to be here in the summer. So I had to like move out of our rental house into this other sublet for the summer last year. And my neighbor, who was so awesome, she was like the best thing that happened from that house. But she came over one night and we were sitting on the porch and she's like, so tell me about your time in Panama. And I was like, how do you know about my time in Panama? She's like, I'm reading your book. And I was like, oh, like I forgot, like people are going to like know stuff about me. So weird. So if you want to,
isn't it?
It is. It's like kind of creepy and awesome all in the same time.
Yeah, people are like, oh, tell me more about that story. I'm like, did we have a conversation about that? Like, oh, it was in chapter 6. And you're like,
right.
Oh, I did tell that story there, didn't I?
Vulnerability in action. Yeah. So reading my book, visiting my website, laurajack.com. I have so many free and other resources there. So people can, I have a blog that I write. I try to write every week, although having a little person, I have done less so lately. Again, having compassion for myself, it will return. And so those are the two best ways to connect with me is through my website, because I actually have a connect button. So if you want to actually talk to me, you can. Really, I mean, those are the two best. And I don't know if this is a good time to mention the gift.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I just recently created, sorry, my eye's itching, the Compassion Code Companion audio series. And so it's now like the download on my website. So if all you have to do is go to my website, laurajack.com, or the compassioncodebook.com. And both of those are places where you're going to be able to download the Compassion Code Companion. Because one of the things that I've realized since the book came out is that compassion in action, which there are compassion and action steps in the book, is hard to do if we're not practicing it on a daily basis. So it's all about building your daily compassion practice rather than just like doing this one-time reading and then never doing it again, because it's a daily thing that we have to do, right? Like it can be part of our meditation ritual, or it can be part of what you're already doing to take care of yourself. It's just adding that element so that you have more skills around having compassion for others without burning yourself out.
That's beautiful. And I love that you call it a compassion practice, because we talk about that even in terms of gratitude. It's a practice. It's not an attitude of gratitude. It's a practice. And to have a compassion practice, because it's a muscle that, just like any other part of your body, your being, your emotional intelligence, you need to constantly be doing things that flex that muscle, that grow that muscle. I mean, if you go to the gym and do one sit-up, I guarantee the six-pack abs are not going to come. And so it's the same space around working on your ability to have vulnerability in action, compassion in action, gratitude in action. These are muscles. These are tools that when you keep honing those pieces and elements of yourself, you become stronger and more confident and more able to bring in different energy and hold space for people and hold space for yourself, and do it in a way that you're not disconnecting and disengaging and burning yourself out. And so it is to create a full holistic space of wellness for yourself. And so I love that you talk about that being a practice. I am a little sad, I'm gonna be honest with my emotions, because we are running out of time. I'm watching the clock going, oh my gosh, I just want to keep engaging in this conversation. And truthfully, I really hope that you'll come back and join us. Or I would love to have more conversation. You know how much I adore you. I mean, you are just one of my most favorite people on earth, and love when we get to spend one-on-one time together. I just feel so blessed by that. So thank you from the bottom of my heart and soul for being here.
Thank you.
I know so many people are resonating deeply with your message and who you are. If you could, as we've talked about a lot, we've covered a lot of different really good, juicy points. If there was something that you wanted to leave our audience with today, as a way to kind of bring things full circle, what might that be?
The thing that just immediately popped into my head is beginning to shift your judgment into curiosity.
Ooh, I love that.
So if you can take the judgment that you have about yourself or about other people and shift it into curiosity. So instead of what a jerk, think, I wonder what happened to that person. Mm-hmm. That's curiosity and not judgment. And that is where compassion for others begins to bloom, and for ourselves, right? Yeah. So that's
beautiful.
That's the thing.
I love that. And curiosity, it's really such a beautiful space for us to dance. And I love that beginning to shift your judgment. First of all, be a witness to your judgment without judging, and shift the judgment into a curiosity to understand and learn more about yourself and others. Right. And, it's such a beautiful segue to say that it's all about how you say yes to yourself first. Are you doing the things so that you can show up in the best way possible to truly lead in all aspects of your life? Because it is a choice. Leadership's a choice. And we've demonstrated that in the conversation today. It's a choice in how you choose to show up. It's a choice in how you choose to serve others. And it's a choice in how you take personal responsibility, which is that opportunity to shift that judgment into curiosity inside those two spaces. So again, Laura, thank you so much. I love you with my whole heart.
I love you.
And thank you all for tuning in and listening to another fantastic, powerful episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe. We have so many amazing thought leaders sharing their stories, sharing their insights, and getting very vulnerable in action in the moment as we get into some really courageous, connected conversations. With that, I hope you all go out and stand in your own power to truly be just a guiding light, and know that I love you. I'm sending heart-to-heart hugs, and we'll catch up with y'all next time.
Thank you.